My mother said I was a bargain no one would buy. I was 23, still smelling of library dust and cheap coffee, when she laid that sentence across the breakfast table like a folded napkin. Outside, the lilacs were pretending that spring fixed everything. Inside, the air felt colder than the porcelain bowl between us. I remember running a finger along a chip in the rim, then setting the bowl perfectly straight, as if symmetry could make the words less sharp. My name is Sloane Merritt, eldest daughter of a woman who believed love was a currency and I had none. She catalogued people by the shine of their shoes and the letters after their names, and she reminded me, consistently, that I was not a collector's item. My degrees were soft, my jobs, temporary, my boyfriends, kind but aimless. She spoke briskly, like an auctioneer, and every sentence sold another small part of my confidence. We lived then in a narrow house that echoed, rooms staged like a listing. My mother's presence made everything careful. She believed the right couch could prevent grief, the right guest list could secure happiness. I learned to keep my hands folded, my laugh low, my questions limited to practical matters. I kept a small journal in my nightstand. In it, I wrote the sort of life I could stand to live, work that mattered, a small kitchen heavy with light, a garden that forgave mistakes, and someone who placed a hand at the small of my back, not to guide but to steady. I met men who admired my diagrams of tide pools and my stubbornness about grant deadlines. When things grew warm, my mother would cool them with a remark or a rumor. A comment about family expectations. A suggestion that I was looking for upward mobility disguised as sincerity. Her voice could thread through a room and pull it shut. I was not naive, but I had been trained to doubt what I wanted. The training worked. At 27, after a fellowship on a windswept coast, I moved to the city to coordinate community conservation projects. I lived above a bakery that started kneading at 4, and my mornings smelled like yes. One night, I went to a fundraiser at a small marina, a silly affair with lanterns and a rented quartet. The wind kept lifting the tablecloths like stage curtains. A man stood at the far end, sleeves rolled, arguing with a vendor about the price of oysters. He was not polished, but he was exact. When the vendor tried to shrug, the man shrugged back, and then he smiled, precise and whole. His name was Theo Kane, a chef by training, a builder by temperament. He had a food truck, a plan for a dockside cafe, and a way of listening that made the world slow down. We did not fall in love all at once. We learned each other's weather. He salted his stories, I trimmed mine. He made soup when I forgot to eat, I packed him oranges when the day ran long. He built shelves for the books I could not afford to love in silence. We worked, not on each other, but next to each other. The kitchen became the small cathedral where effort met comfort. For the first time, I lived outside the shadow of an inspection. When I took Theo to meet my mother, she assessed him with that quick sweep she reserved for handbags. His truck was charming, his ambition admirable, his background unclear. Theo shook her hand, steady. She moved on to the curtains, the weather, the charity auction she was chairing, anything but the man who was teaching me how to live. On the train home, I pressed my forehead to the glass. The city lights skated by, bright and indifferent. Theo laced his fingers with mine and said, simply, "You don't need her to like me for me to like you." My chest loosened, a fraction. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. 2 sentences, sharp as coins. Don't confuse proximity with promise. Men like this marry kitchens, not people. I turned the screen face down, the way you might close a door to keep the night outside. But the words slipped through the hinge anyway. I did not reply. I watched our reflections shiver in the window, and I felt the old training waking up. That night, as Theo slept, I sat at the small table and drew 3 columns on a scrap of paper, what I want, what I can stand, what I will not accept. I left the page there, under a glass, as if weighing it could make the commitments hold. I did not know it yet, but the first spark had been struck, not a plan, not defiance, but the little ember of a boundary catching light. My mother did not protest directly. She preferred to salt the earth and look surprised when nothing grew. She called with updates about other people's engagements, naming venues like ranks. She sent me clippings about the importance of financial compatibility, each article annotated in the margins with arrows, as if to point toward my insufficiency. At brunches, she introduced me as Sloane, who's doing meaningful nonprofit work, for now. She said it kindly, the way one might forgive a rainstorm. Theo noticed the weight, if not its shape. She's practiced, he said, flipping an omelet that landed like certainty. We can practice, too. The truck became a dockside cafe, then a second truck parked under a row of poplars in a new neighborhood. He kept his sleeves rolled, his books neat, his promises small and kept. We talked about buying a tiny place with creaking floors. We put numbers in a spreadsheet and felt rich because they were ours. My mother entered rooms like a gust that carries the scent of expensive flowers and unease. She arrived at the cafe once, unannounced, a week after a write-up in a local magazine. I see the charm, she said, eyeing the wooden menu board Theo had carved. It reads quaint, which the city seems to enjoy. She ordered a coffee, black, and leaned in to say, too softly for anyone else, don't let hope make you untidy, Sloane. You're still too young for charity and too old for fantasy. I went cold in the palms. Theo wiped the counter with the precision of a surgeon and greeted the next customer. We had a silent rule, then. When my mother took a slice, we closed the cut together. Invitations came from friends getting married in vineyards, in hotel gardens, in art museums filled with careful light. We sent gifts we could afford and wore shoes we had cleaned ourselves. On the ride home, I sometimes cried into Theo's shoulder while he watched the road and said nothing. I wanted to belong without negotiating my worth. I wanted to stand in a room in white or blue or some color that felt like me, and not wonder who was subtracting me from herself across the aisle. The most painful part was smaller than grief and lighter than rage. It was a steady constraint, a hand on the back of my neck, guiding me to sit. Every time Theo turned another plan into a door we could walk through, my mother moved the corridor. Maybe, Theo said one night, we build the rooms so well that the corridor stops mattering. He kissed the pretty knot of worry between my eyebrows, and I let myself imagine a future measured in morning coffee rings and the honest fatigue of good work. That winter, my grandmother died, and grief rearranged the furniture of the family. My mother stood at the service in a dress that made sorrow look architectural. I tucked tissues into my sleeve and helped with the casserole dishes. In the hush after the wake, Theo held my coat while I stood in my grandmother's garden, where nothing bloomed, and promised myself I would keep something alive. At the reading of the will, there were the expected lines, careful and fair. To me, a small trust was left, set aside years earlier by a woman who believed I needed a place to stand. On the train home, my mother stared at the wintered fields and said, use it wisely. It sounded like mercy, but it was a map. She had always wanted to steer from the passenger seat. That week, I moved the scrap of paper from under the glass to a drawer, and I added one more line under what I will not accept, being measured by a person who sold herself a scale. I did not shout. I did not storm. I began to save. I began to watch. I began to plan without telling anyone what the plan was. At night, I checked ferry schedules and small rental listings the way some people browse houses they will not buy. Islands dotted the coast like commas in a sentence I had not found the ending to. I wasn't running from my life. I was building a quiet place inside it, a room where my own voice did not echo back as judgment. When Theo finally asked, he did it in our kitchen, in socks, with a ring that looked like water caught in metal. Marry me, he said, as if the words were a tool we would use together. I want to, I answered, and the world felt suddenly exact. We didn't tell my mother for 3 days. In those 3 days, I slept like someone who had set down a heavy bag. We announced it over tea, with my grandmother's porcelain between us. My mother smiled, radiant and brittle. "Congratulations," she said. "We'll make it respectable." Respectable, to her, meant large, curated, leveraged. To me, it meant kind. We did not agree. I felt the old hand on the back of my neck. Then I remembered the new line in my drawer. "Small," I said. "Ours." Theo squeezed my knee. My mother's smile didn't fade. It calcified. "We'll see," she said. I nodded as if I had agreed. I had not. I had taken my first quiet vow. The call came from the estate attorney handling my grandmother's affairs, a careful man with a gentle cough. He needed signatures, he said, and there were papers I should review. "Your grandmother kept impeccable files," he added, a note of fondness in his voice. I set a time and arrived early, because being early felt like a way to respect a person who always was. His office smelled like linen and old ink. Folders were stacked with the geometry of patience. He handed me a pen, then hesitated. "Ms. Merritt, there's something else," he said. "I don't pry, but I observe." He slid a thin envelope across the table, the kind that clicks softly when it closes. "This may not be my place, but your grandmother kept it with the trust notes. I believe she intended for you to see it." Inside were 3 things: a bank transfer record from 8 years ago, a printed email from an account I recognized as my mother's, and a note in my grandmother's spare script, a kind of kindness that never wasted flourishes. The transfer showed a payment from my mother to a man named Andrew Holt, dated 10 days before my first engagement collapsed like a tent without a center pole. The email was shorter than a bruise, as agreed. Nothing dramatic. Clean break. Refund if she contacts you within the month. The subject line read only, S. My grandmother's note said, "For truth, if truth becomes necessary." I stared at the papers as if they were a weather pattern I had missed while standing outside. I remembered Andrew's sudden distance, his careful apology, his claim that we wanted different lives. He had cried, which had made me feel like the cruel one. I had put the ring in a drawer and told myself I was better off, because that is what strong people say when they are trying to remain upright. I had suspected my mother's influence, but suspicion is not a place to live. Proof, however, is a key. Did my grandmother know? I asked, a voice steady out of shock rather than mastery. The attorney folded his hands. She suspected. She found the record while organizing tax files and asked me to retain a copy. She never confronted your mother. She said you would know what to do when it mattered. That night, I called my oldest friend, Wren, who had a laugh like a hammock and a job in community housing that made her fierce and tired. We sat on my rug with tea that went cold and looked at the papers as if they might instruct us. "Do you want to burn it all down?" Wren asked, not lightly. "No. Fire spreads. I want to build something she can't stand in," I said. "Something stable. Something that doesn't need her permission." Wren nodded. "Then start with a boundary, and name it." I named it in my chest, where names hold. I would not allow my mother to curate my joy. I would not hand her the microphone at my life. Theo came home late, sleeves dusted with flour, eyes bright from a problem solved. I told him slowly, the way you fold an important letter along its creases. He listened with his hands still, which is how I knew he understood. He did not rage on my behalf, which is a gift. He asked, "What would feel like justice to you?" The question set something quiet in motion. Justice, for once, did not feel like spectacle. It felt like an environment. I rented a small island for a weekend, a place 15 minutes by ferry from the mainland, bordered by pines and a rocky lip where the water thunked against stone like a reliable heartbeat. It was not rich people rich, but it was dear. I could afford it because my grandmother had believed in ballast. I called a local planner who knew how to do beautiful work without noise. Her name was Dinah, practical as a good coat. "We'll keep it clean," she said. "We'll keep it kind. We'll keep it yours." I ordered invitations of thick paper that took ink like a promise. The script read simple and true. We did not publish a registry. We arranged lodging for family in weathered cabins that smelled like cedar and survival. Theo built a long table from reclaimed wood, sanded until your fingers could glide without catching. He packed it in the truck like a secret and ferried it across with a grin. I put the envelope back inside its click and slid it into my bag. I did not plan a speech. I planned a seating chart with care. I put my mother at the second row, center, not as punishment, but as witness. I made sure the aisle would be wide enough for two kinds of courage to pass through. On the morning the invitations went out, I texted my mother a photo of the island at low tide, stones like vertebrae in a spine that would not break. "We'll be married here," I wrote. "We'd like you to come." She replied within a minute. "A private island, how ambitious." I typed and erased 3 responses. Then I sent only, "It will be small. It will be ours." She did not answer. The proofs of my life were assembling themselves, patient as knots. I did not need her reply to tie them. The wedding weekend began with rain that measured the roof in steady syllables. Theo and I arrived on the first ferry with crates of flowers and jars of nails. Dana stood by the dock with a clipboard that could have run a small government. She had placed lanterns along the path, low and assured, the way a person might light a childhood hallway to disarm the dark. Family came on the second ferry, breath puffing like small trains. Ren hugged me and whispered, "Clean, kind, yours." My mother stepped onto the dock in a coat that made weather look optional. She assessed the cabins, the sky, the practical shoes of the people carrying pies. When she reached me, she kissed the air near my cheek. "It's very intimate," she said. "It is," I answered. "That's the point." That afternoon, we set the long table under a knuckled pine, and the wind moved through the branches with a sound like thought. Theo hammered, then smoothed the final edge with his palm. My mother watched from the porch, a shade drawn on a bright day. I felt the envelope in my bag like a lighthouse weight. After the rehearsal, when the island quieted and the lanterns made small countries of light, I asked my mother to walk with me along the ridge. The water below turned over and over, busy and patient. She wrapped the coat tighter and waited for me to speak. I did not rush. Truth deserves full breath. "I know about Andrew," I said. No adjective, no accusation, just the fact placed carefully between us. Her eyelids lowered, then lifted, a practiced curtain. "What about him?" she asked, tone vacant as a museum wall. I handed her the envelope. She took it with 2 fingers, as if it were printed on heat. I watched her eyes move. She said nothing. Silence gathered like people do when a quiet song starts. I wanted to fill it. I did not. She finally exhaled, the smallest tremor in the sound. "I protected you," she said. "You purchased an ending," I said. "You made me doubt my capacity to be chosen, and then you staged the doubt as wisdom." My voice was even, my feet solid in their boots. She looked away toward the water, which kept doing what it does. "He wasn't right for you," she said. "He would have made you small." I thought of how small I had been under the weight of her management. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I would have found that out with my own hands." Her jaw set. "You're marrying a man with trucks." The old script, heavy with class disguised as concern. I nodded. I'm marrying a man who knows how to feed people, build things, and keep his word. The wind tugged my hair, then calmed. And I'm marrying him without your permission. She handed the envelope back without meeting my eyes. So this is your moment, she said, almost bored. I shook my head. No. This is my boundary. We stood with the sea speaking fluent repetition. I kept my hands at my sides. She held the railing as if the island might tilt. You invited me, she said, finally, to witness your correction. I almost laughed. I invited you to witness my joy, I said. What you call it is your business. What I allow is mine. She looked older then, not fragile, but revealed. The performance slid for a blink. You'll do this without me, she said, as if testing the sheer of the cloth. Yes, I said. I already have. She didn't flinch, which I respected. We walked back separately, two figures stitched to the same path by necessity, not agreement. At the porch, she paused. I won't be embarrassed, she said. It was not a request. There's nothing here to embarrass you, I said. Only things that are true. She nodded once, the smallest bow to reality, and went inside. The ceremony was simple the next day, linen and light. Dinah's lanterns lined the aisle like commas that let meaning breathe. Wren read a poem that sounded like wooden spoons against a mixing bowl, gentle and sure. Theo's hands were steady as he slid the ring onto mine. When the officiant asked for promises, we gave small ones that required daily maintenance. No grand fireworks, just work we believed in. My mother sat in the second row, center, spine like a measure. I felt her eyes, but I did not look to see if they were wet. The proof rested in my bag under the chair, not as a weapon, but as a line. When the officiant pronounced us, the wind moved through the pines with an amen that needed no translation. We kissed, and life did not change shape. It thickened. At the table, Theo poured cider into glasses that caught the gold of late afternoon. I stood to speak. Thank you for coming, I said. We built this with the help of people who taught us that care can be quiet. I didn't retell our story. I didn't name offenders or saints. I thanked my grandmother for ballast and Dinah for lamps and Wren for showing me where to place my hands when shaking. I sat. The island kept floating, which felt like grace. My mother ate in small bites. When she rose to leave early, she touched my shoulder, a tap like punctuation. Congratulations, she said. Her face did not say the rest. It did not need to. We had both heard it. We had both let it pass. Morning came like a hand smoothing wrinkled linen. The rain had gone, leaving everything dressed in a thin, charitable shine. I woke before Theo and stood on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, the kind of simple luxury I had been told was not enough to last. The dock knocked its quiet rhythm against the pilings. The lanterns were dark and dignified. The island asked nothing of me. It allowed what was true to be true. Dinah and her crew were already stacking chairs with that particular tenderness people bring to objects that hosted vows. Wren came down the path with 2 coffees and a grin that could have persuaded a storm to move. You did it clean, she said, handing me a cup. You did it yours. I sipped, and the heat went welcome and far. Thank you, I said. Gratitude felt like a good weight. Theo joined us, hair a map of sleep, smile intact. He kissed my temple. Wife, he said, testing the word like a tool that fits well in the hand. We walked the shoreline, picking up ribbon that had masqueraded as seaweed, shells that had done no such thing. The sky held itself in a soft blue balance. We made a small nation of compost and recycling beside the bins, our private citizenship ceremony. I thought of my mother in her cabin, folding the coat that tried to tell weather what to do. I did not wait for an apology that wasn't coming. I did not write a speech that would wither in the mouth. I sat with the boundary I had set and felt it hold. There was sorrow, yes, a thin seam that would always mark where fabric had been taken in. But there was also space to move. Before the last ferry, my mother found me by the dock. The water had gone mild, repeating itself like a child practicing a line. She wore softness that read like concession. "You looked happy," she said, choosing the word carefully so as not to owe me anything more. "I am," I said. She glanced at the cabin, then at the ring. "He will work very hard," she said, which in her tongue meant, "He is not rich." "So will I," said, which in mine meant, "I choose work we both believe in." She looked at the water and, for a quiet moment, let silence be a language. "Your grandmother," she said finally, "left you a steadiness I never learned." It was the nearest she had ever come to a confession. I could have pushed. I could have asked why she bought endings and sold me warnings. I could have said the word sorry and waited for its echo. Instead, I put a hand on the railing, and I did nothing. A gull cried out, abrupt and comic. We both smiled without planning to. "Thank you for coming," I said. She nodded, and the gesture was unadorned. We were two people not pretending to be another kind. When the ferry pulled away, I watched her face become window, then reflection, then the idea of a person in a coat on a boat. Theo's arms settled across my shoulders, equal parts anchor and breeze. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, meaning for today, for this week, for the kind of marriage that is assembled with ordinary attention. Back on the mainland, we returned to work that smelled like onions and glue, salt and printer ink. Theo hung a photograph of the long table above the cafe register, not grand, just a reminder that we could build a surface wide enough to hold what we offered. I placed my grandmother's small note, "For truth, if truth becomes necessary," inside the back of a frame on my desk. I did not need to see it to feel its weight. It had done its job. Now it was ballast. We did not become new people after the wedding. We became ourselves with fewer apologies. Some nights, Theo came home with burns on his wrists, and I pressed cool cloths to them while he told me about a sauce that finally behaved. Some mornings, I returned from a shoreline survey with shoes full of sand and a head full of community plans, and he cleared a corner of the table so I could spread out maps. We were not fancy. We were exact. On Sundays, I called my mother. I kept the conversations under 10 minutes, the way one waters a plant that has proven it prefers drought. We spoke of weather, of small city politics, of a book neither of us would admit we disliked. Sometimes she asked after Theo's projects, and I told her one thing, no more. I did not offer the kind of intimacy that invites rearrangement. Our peace was a series of respectful distances. Season by season, the island lived in us. Not as a weapon, but as a room we could return to in the mind, and sometimes in person. Once a year, we rented it for a day and picnicked by the ridge where I had set down the envelope and its consequence. We walked the path as if we were laying down lines on a map we were glad to follow. We left lanterns at dusk for the next visitors, because generosity is a kind of revenge against scarcity. When I think of my mother's sentence now, the one she folded into a morning like a sharp napkin, I feel a small tenderness for the person she needed to be to believe it. I can place that sentence on the table without letting it cut me. I can see how it taught me to keep China straight and emotions quieter than was often useful. And I can see how it pushed me toward a version of dignity that does not need display. The truth did not change her, not in the way I once wanted. It changed me. It gave me permission to let my life be built from the ground I could stand on, not the balcony she tried to rent me. My quiet revenge was not the island. It was the steady refusal to trade my joy for anyone's comfort. It was an invitation offered without fear and accepted on my terms. It was a table we made with our hands and set with ordinary plates that still hold. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.